A couple of months ago, Sirui was nice enough to send me one of their new IronStar 35mm T1.9 full frame 1.5x anamorphic lenses, and been shooting with this thing all around Washington for the past couple of months. I've brought it on hikes, I've brought it to the coast, and I've shot some other stuff around the house with it. Really been enjoying my time with this lens. Very high build quality, feels sturdy and solid in the hand. It's got a good heft to it. The iris and focus throw are smooth and feel well put together. Front diameter is 95 millimeters. The filter thread is 92 millimeters, which is a little bit annoying because there's not a lot of filters out there with a 92 millimeter filter thread. So what I've had to do is buy an adapter that allows you to put 95 millimeter filters on any filter thread size from 82 through 95 millimeters. So one extra piece of kit to get in order to put an ND filter on this lens. This lens does come with an EF and PL lens mount. They are very easily interchangeable, and the lenses come with all the tools required to interchange those mounts. You can also adjust the back focusing on this lens, which is nice. These lenses are fast at T1.9. There's currently 3 lenses in this lineup available: a 35mm, a 45mm, and a 60mm. And then there's going to be 3 more lenses coming out later as well. They are all 95mm front diameter. They are all 92mm filter thread, and they're all T1.9. Another key feature with the IronStar lineup is that they have pin cushion distortion and not barrel distortion. When you watch Hollywood films and they're shot on anamorphic lenses, you might notice that the outer parts of the frame seem to distort a little bit. They seem to bend outward. On a pin cushion distortion lens, the frame bends inward, so you'll notice that straight lines appear to distort towards the center of the frame, whereas barrel distortion, those straight lines warp to the outside of the frame. From my experience using this lens, it hasn't seemed to be a big deal. There's been a few occasions where I've really noticed the pin cushion effect. I will say though that optically, at the very center of the frame, when shooting on this lens, there's a circular patch dead center in the frame that is quite soft, and then as you expand outward from that central circular patch, the image sharpens up a bit. I messaged my contact at Sirui about this, and he said that's just kind of a characteristic of shooting on anamorphic lenses, but I don't really have a vast experience shooting on anamorphic lenses to say one way or another. I'm not sure if it's specific to pin cushion distortion lenses, if barrel distortion lenses tend to be sharper at the central point of the image, or if that is just a characteristic of anamorphic lenses in general. But it was one thing that I noticed the first time I shot this lens. Now, I wanted to use this opportunity to talk not just specifically about this IronStar anamorphic lens, but rather about the different sensor formats that we have available to us to shoot anamorphic lenses on these days. As far as I'm aware, in the world of cinematography and filmmaking, a Super 35 sensor is still kind of the industry standard. So when Sirui sent me this lens, naturally I put the EF lens mount on here and threw it on my Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro and started shooting this thing on a Super 35 sensor in a 16:9 aspect ratio, which when you de-squeeze the anamorphic footage in post results in a 2.67:1 aspect ratio. Now, the thing about these Sirui IronStar lenses is that they are designed for full frame cameras, so they can cover a full frame sensor. That got me thinking that I'm just not really unlocking the full capabilities of this lens. So while Sirui was kind enough to send me this lens for free in exchange for this review and let me keep this lens, I still ended up coming out $2,000 poorer after making this video because I decided to purchase a Blackmagic Cinema Camera 6K full frame, because this camera shoots in open gate. So when you take a camera like a Sony a7 IV, which has a full frame 3x2 sensor in it, but when you record video on a camera like the Sony a7 IV, it windows in on the sensor And while it shoots 4K video, you're actually only getting a 16:9 aspect ratio. You're not unlocking the full height of the sensor. So a full frame open gate camera allows you to record the full dimensions of that 3x2 sensor. You may notice on cameras like the Sony a7 IV, you can shoot photos in a 3x2 aspect ratio, which utilizes the entire dimensions of the sensor. But when you want to record video, you're limited to a 16:9 aspect ratio. And when you shoot a 1.5x anamorphic lens on 3x2 open gate, it de-squeezes to 2.25 to 1 instead of 2.67 to 1 like on a 16:9 sensor. So you get a little bit more vertical resolution when you shoot open gate. Now all this technical talk can get a little ridiculous. What I want to do in this video is help you guys visualize exactly what it means to shoot a full frame anamorphic lens on a 3x2 open gate sensor, and then compare those results to shooting on a 16:9 full frame sensor, as well as a Super 35 16:9 sensor. That way we can really see what the benefits are to shooting full frame anamorphic lenses. Here, the first clip I want to look at is the 35mm IronStar 1.5x anamorphic lens shot on the Blackmagic 6K full frame in 6K open gate, utilizing the full 3x2 sensor readout. This is de-squeezed to 2.25 to 1. Now, if we were to shoot the exact same shot on a 16:9 full frame sensor, this is what it would look like, de-squeezed. This is 2.67 to 1. So you can see the difference between 2.25 to 1 and 2.67 to 1. 16:9 versus 3x2. You get that little bit of extra vertical resolution. So now let's take a look at the 35mm 1.5x anamorphic lens on a Super 35 sensor. Again, camera is placed in the exact same position. You can see how tight that is. And we're back to that 16:9 aspect ratio, which de-squeezes to 2.67 to 1. To give you a better idea of just how much more real estate you get when you switch to a 3x2 open gate sensor, let's take a look at the Anamorphic 1.5x shot at 3x2 open gate, de-squeezed to 2.25 to 1 compared to a 35mm aspherical lens shot on a Super 35 sensor. You can see that small window in the center of the frame is the full sensor readout of a Super 35 sensor when you throw a 35mm lens on the camera. It's just a very small window within the anamorphic frame of shooting on 3x2 open gate. All right, this is the comparison that I think is the most interesting to look at. So with the IronStar 1.5x anamorphic lenses, you're going to get a vertical field of view that is the exact same as its aspherical lens counterpart. So this has the same vertical view as a 35mm aspherical lens, but width-wise, this has the same field of view as a 24mm aspherical lens. Here is a 24mm lens on the 3x2 open gate sensor. Now if we jump over to the 35mm 1.5x anamorphic IronStar, you'll see that we lose a little bit vertically, but width-wise, we get the exact same field of view pretty much as a 24mm aspherical lens. So this is one of the key characteristics of anamorphic lenses, along with the elongated flares and the distortion within the image itself. You know, you get a much wider field of view compared to an aspherical lens counterpart of the same focal length. So now if we take a look at the 35mm anamorphic lens and compare it to a 35mm aspherical lens, you'll see the same vertical field of view, but width-wise, we are losing so much on the edges. This is basically combining the image of an aspherical 24mm lens and an aspherical 35mm lens. The vertical field of view of the 35 and the horizontal field of view of the 24. You get that same vertical field of view, but we're getting a much wider field of view on the edges with the anamorphic lens compared to the aspherical. Okay, we also have to talk about the fact that these are T1.9, pretty fast for anamorphic lenses, but is it really usable? Anamorphic lenses in general tend to be a little bit softer than a spherical lenses just because of the way the glass works inside the lens housing itself. Here, let's take a look at the 35mm IronStar 1.5x anamorphic shot wide open at t1.9. You can see the image is pretty soft. Now, I will say that there are certain situations where you might be after this specific look. You know, the story you're trying to tell or the specific shot that you're filming, you know, maybe there's room and there's an opportunity to utilize this kind of softer image and incorporate some of the characteristics of this lens shot at t1.9 to better portray your story. But once you stop this thing down to t2.8, this is where I think the lens really starts to become usable. And then once you stop this to t4, you can see, okay, this really becomes sharp now. This is a totally usable image. And then once you get up to t8, you can see much more of the frame becomes in focus. While the focus is on the cat, much more of the background is also becoming clearer. And then once we get to t16, you can really see that, okay, everything is pretty much in focus. Even though we're focused on the cat, the whole background is pretty much in focus. So I'd say the sweet spot is T5.6, T8, somewhere in there. Okay, to continue on the subject of sharpness, I had to compare the T1.9 wide open aperture of the IronStar lens to a f1.4 spherical lens. So here's a Canon L series 35mm f1.4 lens shot wide open at f1.4. And as you can see, the depth of field is very, very shallow here, but the part of the image that is in focus, which by the way is the central part of the image, looks very clean. And as long as you're nailing focus on this lens, there's no issue with shooting it wide open at f1.4. Now, when you compare it to the IronStar anamorphic lens shot at t1.9, you can see just how drastic of a difference the image softness is. But just thought it was worth noting the difference in sharpness between a f1.4 spherical lens and a t1.9 anamorphic lens. So the biggest takeaway for me with these IronStar lenses is that the full frame coverage makes a big difference, because when I jumped from the Super 35 Blackmagic to the full frame open gate Blackmagic, I was blown away by the difference in quality. So the fact that the IronStar lenses cover the larger imaging format, I think is awesome. Overall, I think this thing is great value. It's got warm color rendition, I noticed, a lot warmer than my spherical lenses that I was shooting on. And I really just throw the footage from this lens in Resolve, put a log to Rec 709 LUT over it, and adjust contrast and saturation. And the image is pretty much exactly what I want it to look like. I know it's a little bit of a different video today, but I hope at least a few of you found it useful and enjoyable. And if you're interested in checking out the Sirui IronStar anamorphic lens lineup, I'll leave a link in the description below. Thanks very much for watching, and I will catch you on the next one. Peace.